Hello and welcome back to our first history lesson this week. And what we're going to be looking at is a video which gives us more information about Viking weapons. And then we're going to think about different ways in which we can present our information clearly. And we'll have a quick look at where the Vikings went to over the course of their history. Now in this video, I'm going to link to another video. So I'm going to tell you to pause at one point and go into the playlist and choose the next video or use the link in the comments section. So in previous lessons, we've looked at some of the tools and weapons that the Vikings might have used or taken into battle. Can you remember their names? So here's our first one. Anybody? So this is the seax. And it was a knife tool that was used for multiple different purposes, cutting meats, chopping wood, but also could be used in a fight if needed. The next one was this one, which is a hand axe, again used normally throughout the farm or stead in order to cut wood or to prepare, but also used in battle. So that's the hand axe. Then we've got this one, which is a shield. Yeah, wooden shield used in order to guard themselves and had a metal boss in the middle here that just helps to flex blows away from the weakest point. And check the hand behind it. Secondly is this one. It's a particular type of this object. Can you remember what the particular name was? So the particular name was a single-handed spear. And the reason why it was very particular was it could be used alongside a shield so that they could defend themselves and get long reach, which was quite important. And then we have this piece of armor, which was chainmail. And chainmail is really good because it meant that the slashing attacks would stop cutting attacks. Now, obviously the force would still be behind it, so they'd normally wear padding underneath it to stop the force going through, but it would stop the swords from piercing the skin or slashing the skin. It was very, very good at that. And then we have, finally, without horns, the helmet. And this is a particular one that's got the face guard over the cheekbones and the nose to protect the eyes. Some of them only had them over the nose, which would still do the same job. Some would have defenders coming down over the ears, which would block out some noise, but did protect the sides of their heads as well. And what you'll notice is that they're designed to have this rimmel on the top, which then deflects blows away from the skull. It would still ring, but it wouldn't damage, it wouldn't dent or damage or cut the head. And finally, probably the most expensive, or definitely the most expensive, and the one that was handed down, it was, of course, the sword. And not all Vikings, by any stretch of the imagination, had swords. They were the most expensive. They were normally gifted to them or passed down through the family. And it was a status symbol to carry a sword. So, if you remember correctly from when we were thinking about archaeology, we were thinking about the finds that were found in York, the Viking town, Jorvik, it was called in Viking time. So they set up what was called the Jorvik Viking Centre. And we had a look at some of the exhibitions that were there. And they got lots of stuff. But what they also do provide educational videos and experiences that go alongside that. So what we're going to do, you can go to the website and find the video there. We would like to thank them. They allowed us to use it and link it into our lessons. So we got permission to use it. But it's a really nice video and it goes through a lot of information about weapons. So this does involve weaponry, so please don't try this at home. I'm going to play the video then what I want you to do is just think about what's happening and what you're looking at. If you want to look at it, if it's stuttering, you can go to the links and look at it that way as well. Or maybe not.
We're going to tell you about Viking weaponry. We're going to show you what they used and how they used it. The first weapon we'll start with is the seax, otherwise known as the sax. This would be worn on the Viking on a belt, right across the front here. Nice and handy, so you can get to it when you need to. It's also a multi-tool, came in very useful, a bit like a large machete. So you can cut through bush, wood, or rope. But should it come to the crunch, you can also use it in combat as well, as we'll show you now. Deadly weapon. Another Viking weapon is the hand axe. One of the most common weapons. A lot of Vikings were originally farmers, and if you were called into battle, what's the first thing you're going to grab? The biggest, sharpest item you have on your farm. This would be the type of axe that would be used on a farm. A multi-tool, again, chopping the wood, cutting up large bits of meat and bone. This is a more specialized item. This is a bearded axe. This part here is the beard, which is on the face of the axe. Now this is known as a skegox. Your skeg is your beard. Now this comes in very useful. During combat, this can be used to gain entry to your enemy if he has a shield. What you can do is you can use it in a chopping action to try to get through, but if you catch their shield, you can pull it out the way, thrust in, and you're right where you want to be. Another movement can be the disarm. Once you catch their axe or even a sword, you can twist and remove it from their hand, disarming them with the hand axe. A very useful item. Probably not thrown in battle because you wouldn't want to discard your weapon, but could be used in recreation just to keep your target practice up. The next item we're going to show you is the single-handed spear. A useful item to have on you, and again, quite a common thing you'll see, a spear being one of the staples of the Viking warrior. This would be used in one hand, much like the axe would, and you would have a shield in the other. Very hard to get through to. And of course, you've got a further reach. Now, if I had an axe, all I have to do is get past the pointed end, like so. As you can see, the hard thing is trying to get past the important part at the end, but a very popular weapon indeed. Another weapon used by the Vikings was the double-handed spear. Some of these 8, 9 feet long. Handy thing to have. Quite a common item as well. But of course, if you've got both hands on a spear, you have no defense. And this is where your shield brother comes in useful. I will be a shield brother in a shield wall. And he is behind me, but he has more reach. He can see things I can't. I can open people up, and he can then stab through. Also, we can move around quickly. I can get him where I want him. So he can look after me as well, and we will take care of each other. Vikings, of course, also needed to protect themselves. And one way of doing that was a mail shirt. Now, there's a few different ways of making mail. This is split mail, where the rings are pressed together. Not one of the most common ones, or the most protective, unfortunately. But then you could rivet the mail as well, and also weld it together. Welding would take slightly longer, but it'd be much stronger than this. And the rivet, well, the rivet mail, the most expensive, would take the longest, and of course, be the heaviest. Only the richest and mightiest warriors could afford this. But this could save your life. If you were cut in battle, you may die 2 weeks later from infection. So this was going to save your life. Another important thing to do in Viking times was protect your head. Now, you could go into battle without wearing anything, but I wouldn't fancy that myself. To begin with, you could have a simple boiled leather hat. You boil the leather, makes it tougher, shapes to your head. It's a good start, but again, if you can afford something better, you definitely wear it. Early helmets like this, from around the year 750, were found in Valsgard during the Vendel period in Sweden. So it's considered sort of pre-Viking, but you can see these guys will be well protected in these. The later period saw the nasal helmet, quite a generic helmet. But you'll notice how neither of these helmets have horns on. Your helmet should be a nice conical shape so you can deflect a glancing blow. Anything sticking out and it's going to cause you problems. But it's a good way to go into battle, well protected. Another quite brutal weapon used by the Vikings was the mace. Now this, purely for battering people with. The ultimate fighting Viking weapon, the sword. The most expensive, the one made purely for battle, and only used by the professional warriors who could afford one. These were very expensive, and they were handed down in the families. Sometimes the Vikings would imbue them with the spirit of their ancestors. By adding the carbonized bone of their ancestor to the iron, they would create a stronger sword, a steel weapon. And this is how they were used. At the head of your Viking army, you could protect yourselves with the mighty Dane axeman, someone who's not to be messed with. The famous Viking at Stamford Bridge was said to be on the bridge, keeping back a whole army with his Dane axe. These could cleave a man and horse in two with one blow, not to be trifled with.
So, your task, your first task this week, having a look at that video, and you can look at it again if you like. I want you to choose 3 of the items that they discuss. I want you to name the tool or weapon, draw a good picture of it, nice and clear, use the images that they've got there to help you. And then I want you to describe how it was used in battle. So not just about what they were talking about, but actually how you saw it being used by them when they were demonstrating as well. Okay, so what also we're going to look at is where the Vikings went. So this map shows that. Now, there's one thing we need to know about, and that's what the centuries mean and how that relates to years. So the weird thing is, the naming of centuries started in the 1st century, and the 1st century was the very first one in AD. And it actually would have gone from 1 to 100 or 99. You go to 100, you get to the next century. And that would have been known as the 1st century. So 0 to 99 was the 1st century, which means 100 to 199 was the 2nd century. And that can get quite confusing, because when you talk about centuries, you're actually talking about the 100 years before whatever the number is. So if we're talking about the 8th century, we'd be talking about the years 700 to 799. if we were talking about the 11th century, we'd be talking about the years from 1000 to 1099. It's just something to remember and things that people get confused about. So thinking about that, we just need to bear in mind that when we've got it here. So you can see down at the bottom, there's a little key that tells you when those years were. So we know that Vikings traveled a long distance. In fact, they went beyond what we can see here over to Vinland. And they traveled away from their homelands to raid, to trade, or to find better farmlands and to settle. So they did it for lots of different reasons. And they did this over the course of several hundred years. And although this map is quite complicated, it does show where the Vikings went and at what time they went there. So let's have a quick talk through it. The first thing it talks about is the 8th century. So this is from 700 to 799. And those areas in dark red is where they were at that time. And this is where they have settlements. So this is an important thing. What they're talking about here is where they have villages, where they live, okay? There is another part, and we'll talk about it in a minute, as to where they might have raided but not have lived. So at this time, in the 8th century, they only were living in Scandinavia, which is Norway, Sweden, Skåne, and Denmark, which is this area here. And you can see that there's little bits elsewhere that must have been quite close and very easy for them to get to. You got to remember that Sweden was quite lowland and Norway's really hilly, so it depends on where they would go from there. Then you enter the 9th century, so 800 to 899, and you can see this is when they travelled across and settled in England, parts of Scotland and small parts of Ireland, where they also went across, just across here, down into a few places over here, and further parts of Scandinavia, as well as you can just see part of Iceland right on the edge over here. And that's where they set up settlements. And as the years rolled on into the 10th century, you can see they spread even further. Parts of France, in Normandy, in Prussians and Kurds, down through the Russian states all the way to the Black Sea, the rest of Iceland, some parts of Greenland, and even further abroad into Vinland. So they spread quite a long, long way. And then the 11th century, from 1000 to 199, those yellow areas, they finally managed to spread some of their influence into the rest of England here, a little bits down near Constantinople down here, parts of Italy and Africa, because they'd come all the way around. Now, the other colour we can see is green. And what the green actually is throughout all of these years, they were parts that the Vikings raided but never settled in. So they went there to steal what they wanted from the area, but never actually set up permanent villages in those areas. And you can see how spread that was all the way down the coast of Europe and round into the Mediterranean, around the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea over here, across Russia up here, through Finland here and here, the rest of England and the British Isles that wasn't settled. So vast tracts of land. And this isn't to say that some of these other areas, say for example, this red part of England, before they settled there, was also being raided. So some of the areas which are coloured otherwise would have been raided as well before the settlement happened. So your second task, what I want you to do is have a look at this map, and in your own words, I want you to talk about in 750 AD, where would their settlements have been? In 850, where did they go to? Just give me one example. 950, 1050. And then name one area where it was regularly raided, but they never gave any settlements. So basically, I want you to write me a small paragraph which explains the different areas where the Vikings went to. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.